They've been around since the beginning. But what do we really know about them? It's time to start asking questions. I'm Chris Brunt. This is PODRE. Okay. Tell us who you are. You just talk to it. Just talk to it, baby. Just talk to it. It's okay.
I am Nico. I'm going to make podcast.
You're going to make it right
with you. Okay, now for the episode of PODRE. Oh, PODRE.
I'm a huge fan of The Sopranos. This will definitely not be the last time I talk about Tony Soprano as a father on this show. There's this great moment in the first season where Tony, mob boss, father of two, suburban New Jersey dad, is driving his daughter Meadow on a tour of colleges. Typical American father-daughter experience. But on this car ride, Meadow turns to her dad and says, point blank,
"Are you in the mafia?"
Am I in the what?
Whatever you want to call it. Organized crime.
I'm in the waste management business. Everybody immediately assumes you're mobbed up. There is no mafia.
Fine.
And it catches him off guard. He kind of hems and haws. He tries to wiggle his way out of it. There is no mafia. He's looking back at the road. He's looking at her, and he's thinking, like, how am I going to wiggle my way out of this? And he kind of realizes she already knows the truth. So this is a test. Is he going to tell the truth or not? And Tony says to her, all right.
Some of my money comes from illegal gambling and whatnot. How does that make you feel?
At least you don't keep denying it like Mom.
Even though Tony doesn't tell her the full truth, he doesn't say, yes, I'm the street boss of the DeMeo crime family. It gives her just enough. It preserves that bond that they have, right? It's just enough truth for her to still feel like they trust each other, you know? And then she opens up to him. And they go on. They continue to have this great relationship, but her mother and her, it's a very different story. Tony's told the truth. Mom hasn't. This is a theme that's going to come up again and again today on this episode of PODRE. Why do we lie to our kids? Are we trying to protect them? Or are we trying to protect ourselves? And how does not being able to trust your parents affect you as a child? What about as you grow into an adult? And how do you make sure, if and when you have your own kids, that you're being open and honest with them at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons? I'm going to talk about all this and a lot more with my guest today, comedian and actor Baron Vaughn. You might know Baron because he's one of the funniest people in America. His stand-up specials, Raised by Cable, and Black Existential Crisis are streaming on Amazon Music. As an actor, you can find him on everything from the Netflix hit Grace and Frankie to Mystery Science Theater 3000 to BoJack Horseman. But I know Baron because he's my wife's best friend. And once upon a time in the city of Austin, Texas, he officiated our wedding. And over the last decade or so, I've gotten to hang out with Baron and see him perform all over the country, and he really is one of the most talented people I've ever known. And now we're going through fatherhood at roughly the same pace. I recently visited Baron and his family at their new home in their new home city of Atlanta, and our boys got to meet each other and spend a couple days running around the house and the backyard together. Baron and I have pretty different styles as fathers, but I like his style. It's uniformly easygoing, it's gentle, of course it's playful and creative and hilarious. This one night he freestyled verses for every letter of the alphabet over this kid's song in the cadence of an 80s MC. And now we come to K. He is on another level. He's exactly who you'd want as a dad, which is amazing given that he grew up without one.
I'm mixed race, multi-ethnic, biracial. I know you can't tell because I'm a consistent shade. My mom was black and my father was absent. So I'm like half black, half empty. You know what I'm saying? Half half full. I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist on that one. Don't get sad. Some of you just got sad. Like, why? Now I know why you need to tell jokes. And don't get sad, because people shuffle up the Buffalo to me after a show, just like, oh my God, Mr. Comedian, do you miss your father? And I don't miss what I never had. There's no emotional attachment, no significance. It would be the same to walk up to me and say, do you miss your pterodactyl wings? Do you miss your ability to urinate Kool-Aid laced with crack? Do you miss your self-integrity? Because I'd rather have those three things. What's a dad gonna do? Play catch? I'd rather fly around making crackheads happy. That sounds like a weekend to me. Thank you, crackadactyl! And now you all know what Kwanzaa's about. Thank you very much, I'm Baron.
Why would you...
But I'm old, I think we're the same age, similar ages.
I think you're a little bit older than me, because you're more Chanel's age, right?
She's older than me too.
Oh, okay.
She's 1 year older than I am.
Okay, well then, yeah, I'm still much younger than both of you.
Well, okay.
I'm still in my 30s. Let's put it that way. Whoa. I'm still in my 30s.
Hey, it's the same for my wife, Rhiannon. She's 4 years younger than me. So I wish that there weren't completely different references for that little of an age range, but there really are.
Oh my God, yes. It's a totally different cultural storehouse. She's talking about shows that I'm like, that's from the History Channel. Like this. The other day, I'm in the kitchen and I'm going, I'm just a teenage dirtbag baby.
Oh, I remember that.
And she's
song,
like,
yeah.
what are you singing? Like, stop. And I was like, hold on a second.
That?
Like, come on, that's the song of high school. And she's like, I've never heard that before in my life.
It's the song of my high school. I feel like I keep hearing, and I don't want the world to see you, because I don't think, what is that, the Goo Goo Dolls or something? I feel like
Goo Goo Dolls.
I could not escape Goo Goo Dolls and Matchbox 20 no matter what I did.
I hated that shit. Oh,
so did I. So did I. But at some point it gets through and you're like, is it good? Or if I just heard it a billion times?
It's kind of a good hook, but I fucking hate it.
Mm-hmm.
How's Atlanta, man? You moved.
I was just thinking about this too, because this leads to a weird existential, philosophical thought that I've been having about the fact of moving. Today it is normal. Today you move where the work is. And I think about when I was a child and how abnormal it was to move.
Yeah.
I feel like the 80s normalized, okay, well, I got to move 2,000 miles that way, but it used to not be that way. And I feel like there's something that has been lost, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the word is community, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's one of the biggest reasons we moved here is to become part of a community, quote unquote, plant roots. It's also about the kids. I like the idea that my kids are going to grow up here and that this is a city that's going to inform who they are in a lot of ways. Yeah. Where I always felt like a transplant in some way, even as a kid. I always felt like as a transplant, in that I didn't necessarily live. I lived where it ever was I was sleeping, but I never identified myself as like a Las Vegan, for instance, which is where I mostly grew up. There, or in New York, I always felt like it was a temporary thing. LA always felt like it was a temporary thing, even though I was there for a decade.
Yeah. And
this does not feel that way for a number of reasons. But, the biggest one being that the kids can grow up here. Like this is where they're going to grow up.
You're giving them a hometown.
Exactly.
How are your kids doing?
They're great. I can hear them upstairs right now. But they're both doing pretty well. And they're really loving this new house that we're in, running around it.
Savion, man, Rhiannon's Insta feed. That's the best dressed kid I've ever seen in my life. I don't know if it's an LA thing, if it's but when you step out in LA, even if you're like a 2-year-old, you got to have on some nice sneakers. But this kid,
I am going a little overboard. I'm like, he's my mini hype beast because kid clothes, not as expensive as adult clothes. So it's like, oh, those shoes are actually only $30 for a kid.
Those are designer.
Oh, yes, exactly.
No, man. Every time, like, Chanel will show me she'll hand me the phone and be like, look at Savion. I'm like, oh my God, we've poor Julian, like
I'll give you some tips. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, hook it up, man. Send me the.
We'll get Julian and Nico in there.
I wonder if you have that moment yet as a father where, whatever's going on, whether it's a happy moment or not so happy moment, whether you're being the kind of disciplinarian or just goofing around with him, where you sort of think to yourself, oh, this might be how my kids see me as a dad, either, one day or when they look back. Do you know what I mean?
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I do know what you mean. I don't know that I haven't had that much self-awareness about it, because usually in a moment I'm like, put that down, put that down, put that down. But like, I had a real father moment the other day where I like screamed at him to the fact that he was so scared because he made this whole. I went to the bathroom and I locked the door and I come back and there's just all this stuff under the door that he was just sitting there like trying to knock the thing down and throwing things at the door. And I'm like, what is this? So I was trying to tell him, like, you need to pick this mess up and put everything back in your room. Mm-hmm. And he didn't want to. And he basically did Paul Rudd from Wet Hot American Summer, where he was just a real kid about it. And was just like, oh, I was like, pick it up. And he was like, oh, okay, oh, God. And he like crawled and like limped. Like I'm like, what are you doing? And then once he had it all put away, he was really upset because I had yelled. And then we sat together and we just kind of like sat there with each other until we were regulated, which is my new favorite word. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think this actually wasn't that bad. Like I was upset because I had yelled so hard at him. Yeah. But my wife was like, what are you talking about? I yell at them? Like, it's just like, they don't do things. Sometimes you have to get their attention, And so it's like, I was like, all right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between, at least in our house, there's a big difference between daddy's yelling and mommy's yelling. Like there's just a difference in the energy.
It's bass. it's bass in the voice. And I was like, because I was very frustrated and he was very not listening. I'm trying to like come up with the way to make this look the best. I'm like, don't take away my kids' CPS. I'm good. I'm a good dad, I swear. But yeah, it's funny because there's certain habits that every now and then I'm like, I still deal with my own version of self-hatred, self-loathing. So when I see them do a behavior or act in a way that I think is like me, it makes me go, I've ruined them. Like I did something wrong,
right? Which
is not the fact. They're just it doesn't mean they're bad. I keep thinking of everything that I was told was bad when I was a kid, but it doesn't apply anymore. But I have to keep reminding myself of that. Like, if they look at the phone for an hour, it's not going to melt their brains because they still want to go outside. Like even if they were on the phone all day, there's a point where they naturally go, hey, you want to throw this ball? Like, it's like, oh, cool. Yeah. They're like little self-starters in some ways.
You don't have to control so much of their behavior. I mean, my parents were like that too, right? Every single tiny thing had to be under their control, under their management. And I think our generation of parents is more like, all right, it's not quite so necessary.
Yeah. And that's and learning that balance is the thing that I'm, still in the midst of, is like, I can't control everything. There are I can create like boundaries, parameters for them to be inside of.
Yeah.
And, but it's not going to be perfect. You know what I mean? And I have to be patient with myself and them. The level of patience that I have, I'm way more patient with them than I am myself.
And I feel like the theory driving my parents' like mania for control was that they were going to somehow turn me into the person they wanted me to be, which was a really bogus theory underneath the practice of parenting. And I think that's what I reject, right? That I have the ability to really turn my kid into who I want him to be, or that I should try to do that. right? That like, no matter what
That's
I do,
really-
these kids are turning out the way they're going to turn out. So I just have to put up those parameters and those boundaries, and I have to be a certain kind of, safe harbor for them.
That's very well said. That's very well said. And I think that was exactly my experience as well. Like, I was under the watchful eye of a dictator, and that's not how I am. And because I didn't like it, and I am who I am there was, and my mother admitted later, about like trying to make it so certain things didn't happen or so I didn't go down certain paths. And it's like, but if I was going to go down that path, I was going to go down that path. The thing is about whether or not I trust you to tell you, like if I'm going to tell you about it,
yeah,
or not, because
if I'm going to come to you, yeah,
if I'm going to come to you, and that's what it is that like, as romantic as it sounds, I do want to be somebody that my kids feel okay coming to, as opposed to fearing me,
and to not sort of cultivate that silence, right? That silence around all of the painful, all the scary stuff, all the lifey shit that's gonna happen no matter what. To not have that culture of silence. This is a house where we can talk to each other. We can hear each other.
Exactly.
All right, so let's go then back to the beginning. We'll go Marin style here and talk about growing up. So you're from Las Vegas. Just tell me a little bit about where you grew up and who you grew up with.
Okay, well, I mean, there was a place before Las Vegas, which was New Mexico. I was born in a small town called Portales. Portales, that's right. The Portals. That's a place I don't really remember. And then...
Because you left when you were how old?
I want to say like 2.
Okay, yeah. Of course I don't remember it.
And then I was in Tucumcari, New Mexico until I was about 8-ish. And then that's when we moved to Las Vegas, Nevada. Vegas was a fully different experience, even though the thing that it had the most in common with New Mexico, at least the parts of New Mexico I grew up in, was it being the desert. So like this dryness, hot all day, super cold at night sort of thing was not new. But the culture of Vegas, especially because we moved there before the boom of Vegas, which now I did a little research and now I see that like, oh, okay, we moved to Vegas before there was like an economic explosion, basically in 91, I want to say. So it was like we wanted to get out of New Mexico, which at the time was not doing well. So let's remember it's Reagan's America. So every child was left behind. that was I think that was one of his campaign slogans. Every child left behind. And then we got to Vegas, which was the land of opportunity, as we saw it. It was a big city with a lot of work. The Mirage opened. When the Mirage opened, it started this period of unending growth for Vegas. It was the fastest growing city in the country until the 2008 recession happened, And then my mother got hired to the Mirage. I think she was in the first fleet, the first fleet of hiring. And there was this crazy influx of kids. And Vegas did not have the infrastructure for the amount of people that were moving there that already had 10, 11-year-olds, in tow. So it was like suddenly there was just too many 11-year-olds in Las Vegas and there weren't enough schools to handle it. And
it's you, your mom, and who else?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother.
Yeah.
So it's the 3 of you living together. Your mom's working at the Mirage.
So suddenly there was this level of security that we did not have before. And then we moved. We were in a part of Las Vegas called North Las Vegas, North Town. It is also known, kind of out by the Air Force Base, Nellis Air Force Base. And that's the hood of Vegas. And the other thing that started to happen when the kind of the population boom of Vegas happened was, like I said, a lot of kids coming to Vegas all of a sudden, a lot of teenagers coming to Vegas, a lot of kids from LA. So there was this gang almost like a corporate takeover where the Bloods and the Crips moved into Vegas, and any gang that was already there either fought them to keep their stuff or became part of them. And Northtown was like pretty rough. And my mom wanted to move closer to the Mirage so that way she didn't have to drive an hour to work every day. But also, I think she wanted to kind of get out of that neighborhood. Not that we moved to a neighborhood that was that much better. It wasn't as violent, but there were still, quote unquote, problems. I say problems with quotation marks, because I'm like, I look back at it now and it's like everybody was like there was too many kids. There was too many kids and not enough adults.
Not enough shit for the kids to do.
Exactly. Vegas didn't have that. And that's actually, there was a time that it was before the whole whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas campaign, which kind of like defines Vegas now, where they tried to make it a family-friendly place. I think that had to do with the mafia moving out and the corporations moving in.
Right.
And they're like, let's open up an indoor theme park at Circus.
It's Disney in the desert.
They tried to do that. They tried to make it into like a giant theme park.
And meanwhile, in your neighborhood,
family.
Meanwhile, in your neighborhood,
that thing that weird I don't want to say PTSD response of like, you're just like hanging out with some kids, and then out of nowhere you see a kid running, and you're like, oh shit, and you just start to run. You don't even know why, but it is that like something's coming. I don't want to be here for it, sort of a thing. Yeah. And that was definitely like what Vegas was like. Yeah. People were afraid of drive-bys. Everybody was like, you can't wear certain colors, and the schools were like, again, trying to control it, but they didn't understand it. So it was always like, you can't wear red, you can't wear blue, you can't wear Raiders jerseys, you can't wear do-rags, you can't wear this type of shoe, you can't wear, like, it was like all these rules that they were trying to control gang violence or gang affiliation or whatever.
Do you laugh about that stuff as a kid, or does it make you kind of paranoid?
Very paranoid, maybe super, super paranoid.
Yeah.
Because it was like, the news was obsessed with it.
Right.
Because it was sensational.
You got Tipper Gore on fucking...
Oh, yeah. Tipper Gore. I mean, it was like that era of like, NWA was big, where it was just like, and then what was the Ice-T song, Cop Killer, and all of these things, who is now like one of the most respected cops on TV. And now,
Officer Ice-T.
Officer Ice-T. Tutawala. Is that what the T stands for? I have no idea. Rhiannon goes to sleep to SVU, so I feel like I hear it a lot. I'm like, the relaxing, sleepy sounds of rape investigation. Yes,
weren't you on an episode of that one time? Was it?
No, not SVU. It was never on SVU. Okay. I was on Criminal Intent. And I was also on Original Flavor. So those are the two ones that I was on. But thank you for remembering. I wasn't real until I was on those to my grandmother. Those were. What
about your grandmother though? When you're growing up, is she looking after you while your mom's working at the casino?
Yes, because my father wasn't around. Now, see how I gloss over that? Like it's something that I look at now and I go like, to back then it was just a fact. Yeah. But the fact that I didn't have a father wasn't abnormal to me. It was my experience. And it wasn't until later that I realized, oh, it's just me and my mom. And my grandmother, like there is no male figure here, or whatever. Yeah, I guess I just didn't have any male role models. I hate to say it as reductive as that, but like every man that I looked up to was on TV, it was some kind of comedian, it was Pryor or Eddie Murphy or, Martin or, one of the Wayans brothers, whoever the heck was on The Living Color, like all these, things I watched, Saturday Night Live and all that stuff. So it was like, that's the idea of being a man to me, was being funny. And then as it started to get scarier in these streets, and I was like, I can't fight, like I don't have a weapon. So let me be funny. If I'm funny, then maybe I can charm everybody out of harm. I can charm away from the harm.
And that's what you feel like you weren't looking at guys in the neighborhood, like older guys, and going, I got to get more like that guy. You're like, I got to get more like Pryor to make it through this world. I got to be more like. Yeah,
I mean, and that was entertaining to me. And I liked, I liked being funny, and I liked being funny at school. like making other kids laugh and all that stuff. And, you know, it's interesting you say that thing about the guys in the neighborhood, because that is a big thing that I really did not have. There was no sense of who was in my neighborhood at all. Like, a lot of people grew up in a place where, you know, I don't know if it was like the person who ran the business on the corner, like a store or a barbershop or whatever the crap. And then there were like people who hung out on the stoop.
Yeah.
I didn't have any of that.
Why not?
So it was because Vegas was not only just super duper hot, and I think people just didn't want to be outside, but it seemed like everyone was just doing their own thing. That idea, that sense of community, I don't think I ever really experienced it in a neighborhood sense. I didn't know any of my neighbors. They didn't know who I was. And if anything, we were all afraid of each other. You know, there was just the nonstop fear. Again, it was on the news all of the time. So it was just like this nonstop feeling of you're in danger and it's your neighbor, you know, somebody that looks like you and smells like you.
But the reality is just, this is lonely as fuck. Where is everybody?
Yes. It was very lonely in Vegas. And it was like, I spent a shit ton of time alone as a kid and outside. You know, I would say I was latchkey because I was watching myself younger than I guess is supposed to be. You know, if my mother was working, my grandmother was working, I came home from school and I was by myself for a couple hours every day. But there was this, I mean, loneliness. That is a good way to put it, you know.
What about your sister's dad? Was he around at all?
Yes, that was my stepfather. My mother married him and he was the father to my sisters. And he was around. He was somebody else that was in Vegas. And, you know, my mother and he recently divorced. Thank the Lord.
Congrats.
Yes, congrats to my mom. He was around because those were his daughters. But he was also working. Like, I felt like he and my mother were just working, and my grandmother too. My grandmother kind of was like, it's funny because I look back at it now and it's all like, I almost want to say that she was a bit of a drifter. Sometimes she was with us and sometimes she wasn't. And when she wasn't, I had no idea where she was. You know, I didn't know who her friends were. I didn't know where she hung out. She had a car and I wouldn't doubt if she lived in it, you know, here and there and stayed with her friends. But I don't know. I look back now and I go like, wow, was she homeless? Like, my grandmother was homeless and just like working this job. And then she would stay with us for a year and then disappear and then come back for a year and then disappear. That's what I remember. But
you wouldn't ask her questions. Grandma, where you been? What's going on in your life?
Ooh, asking questions. That was not a thing. I don't want to say I wasn't curious. I guess I just accepted that I was never going to get any answers. I mean, my grandmother and my mother, there was a palpable tension between the two of them. And my grandmother doted on me. And I don't know if it made my mom jealous or if she felt she was being usurped, you know, as the primary parent. But they had a lot of tension that I think, you know, probably dated before I even got there. But like,
sure,
asking questions or just like talking about what was going on wasn't a thing. I just kind of knew that I wasn't going to get an answer and that silence was the way.
Did you feel closer to one of them?
Oh, I felt closer to my grandmother, definitely. Felt closer to my grandmother.
How
grandmother, well, my grandmother would take me places. She would take me places to run errands with her. And that's when I would experience her world a little bit. Like, she was the one who took me to the barbershop when it was time to get a haircut. There was a place in North Las Vegas that we always went. And, you know, it's funny because I was talking to some friends about this, like the classic barbershop experience of like, you know, the movie, you know, where there's like a bunch of people talking about the news and talking about whatever the heck they're talking about. And then this black woman walks in and everyone went, shh. How you doing, young blood? And it literally was like
best behavior.
I went in, my grandmother was the only woman that would walk into there to get me a haircut And everybody shut the hell up the moment she walked in there. I could see from the window that there was action happening. And then we'd walk in and be like, oh, there's a lady here, sort of a thing. So it was like, even my barbershop experience was fully silent.
Yeah, and you're like, at ease, boys, come on, like resume the experience. I'm here now. Like, let me participate. Even know,
again, because silence was already my culture, at home. Like, again, I watched a lot of TV. My grandmother and I, when we were in her car, we would talk a lot. We'd listen to music. And we drove, I feel like I did a lot of road trips from Vegas to New Mexico to visit my great-grandparents, her parents.
Just you and her?
Just me and her. Yeah, we would drive back, and it was a long drive. I don't remember exactly how long, but we would, it was like 3 tapes that we would listen to over and over again, and then play the game where we called out every license plate from every state that we could find. Mm-hmm. But I remember it was like Sam and Dave, Best of Sam and Dave.
Yeah.
I still love Sam and Dave to this day.
Hell yeah.
The Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack. And now that I think about it, I think it was the Woman in Red soundtrack. Do you remember that movie at all?
No.
The Woman in Red was this weird Gene Wilder movie, but the whole soundtrack was Stevie Wonder songs.
Wow.
I think I Just Called to Say I Love You was on that.
Yeah.
He had a song called The Woman in Red that was in there.
All right. So you're growing up with your grandmother, your mother, eventually your stepdad. What's your relationship like with him when you're growing up?
Not good.
Not good.
It was very... I don't know if he thought that he was aware that I had no male presence, and he took it upon himself to be the dad that I never had, I guess, but we never got along. He was a very severe person and a very, I would say, egotistical, kind of narcissistic person. I tried to stay away from him. I was a troubled kid as far as my mother and my stepfather were, as far as they were concerned, I was a troubled kid. I don't think that they really knew me, and that they, if anything, just tried to control me more than they tried to understand me. That was the tension, I feel like, that defined my middle school and high school years, as well as the fact that my mother was a bit of an addict. I'm understating it. I mean, it got more extreme as I got older, which I think was a combination of having more to deal with, like having this job and then having a husband and having a teenager that started to look like and or act like the guy who was like, I don't want to be involved, when she found out she was pregnant. So, I'm like editorializing a little bit here, but, I do believe in some sense that it's that tension of I love you and I hate you when you're the person's child, wasn't something that was normal to talk about. All that stuff was still very stigmatized.
Yeah. Did she ever talk to you about your father? I mean, did you ask questions? Were you curious about him?
I mean, it wasn't until I guess I kind of had put him out of my mind and put the fact of ever knowing him or meeting him out of my mind. I don't know if it was communicated to me that he wanted nothing to do with me or whatever, but I took that, tactic for him as well. Like, well, he doesn't want anything to do with me. I don't want anything to do with him, but again, it wasn't something that I felt was missing because I didn't know anything else. I remember seeing a picture of him that my mother showed me when I was young, but I was also kind of like, it wasn't impressive to me. It didn't mean anything to me. It was a picture of someone I never met. So I was like, okay, like, can I go? I don't know. I don't really know what you want me to do with this. And then when my stepfather came into my life, I think that they thought it would be good for me to meet my father or something, but it didn't happen. I also don't know if, again, like I look back and I'm like, what was real and what was not? Like, did they actually reach out to him? Did they, or did they just say that they did?
But they did tell you that they reached out to him?
Yeah, and this was like in middle school. I want to say that like, oh yeah, we reached out to your father or something like that. But like, it didn't feel genuine. You know, like to this day, I don't even believe that they actually did.
Because nothing came of it.
Nothing came of it, but they also gave me a story as to why nothing came of it.
Do you remember the story?
They said that he wanted money to meet me. And I'm like, I don't know if that, I'm like, okay. I didn't know if they were saying it again. It felt like it was a card that was being played to keep me in control.
Yeah, but that's a particularly brutal card. I mean, God
maybe,
damn.
But I didn't think anything about it because I wasn't interested in meeting him. And they did this without my knowledge. So I didn't ask like, hey, I want to meet my dad. Is there a way to get in touch with him? It was like,
sure.
They just surprised me with this information while I was like in the middle of, eating a bowl of Fruit Loops or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
And they're like, we reached out to your father. I'm spitting out the Fruit Loops. I'm like, more like Unlucky Charms. Am I right? Which is what a lot of people are saying these days. Apparently there's a horrible thing that's happening with Lucky Charms. It's making people sick. Did you hear about this?
No.
Lucky Charms is making people throw up. It doesn't matter. My apologies to General Mills or Kellogg's or whoever the hell. Post, the three cereal, the triumvirate, cereal mega powers.
I'm not on cereal Twitter, so I don't really know what's happening.
Cereal Twitter. Oh, there's got to be a cereal Twitter. Hey, what happened to Waffle Crisp? Hashtag best goat.
Captain
goat
Crunch.
Cereal.
What's going on with Captain Crunch? He's
Where are
canceled.
Crunch Berries?
He's canceled.
That French admiral. What the heck were we talking about? Oh, my father, right. Yeah, and it's just kind of like, I watched a lot. I mean, my grandmother, even though she was in the wind, she loved TV. We all loved TV. So my grandmother's contribution, because I look back now and like, did she pay rent? Because I feel like her and my mom like fought about whether or not she paid rent a lot. But she did get cable for us. And cable was not yet normal. So I could watch all kinds of stuff. And I did. I watched HBO all of the time because I knew I wasn't supposed to, in a way, because I knew it was like for grownups. And I was like, it was an education to me. And by the time I was living in the place that was...
Were you watching the comedy special on HBO?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, who do you remember?
I was watching all of the HBO one night stands. That was like my jam. You know what I mean? So, and I also remember the hour specials. Like I remember George Carlin. I remember, Ellen. I remember Margaret Cho. I remember, Garofalo, Marin. You talked about Marin. I remember D.L. Hughley, and I watched Def Comedy Jam that night, when it was on, because it was like, I mean, all of these, because Martin was the first host of Def Comedy Jam, and Martin was huge. Like everybody watched Martin. So it was like Martin was on, Living Single was on, and Living Color was on. And then outside of those characters that they played on that show, I could see this other version of them where they're just standing up talking.
Yeah.
And that was like, I was like, what is this? Like, how can you just talk to an audience and it's funny? Like, I didn't understand. Like, that was like blew my mind.
Yeah.
At the time. But like, and I was, very much into sketch comedy and stand up. And I was watching SNL and I was watching Carol Burnett, and Hee Haw. I was taking in all versions of it that I could because I was curious about, at that age even, what does and doesn't translate, what is and isn't audience specific, what is and isn't generation specific. Like that there were things that I knew would make my mom laugh or my grandmother laugh that wouldn't make me laugh and stuff like that. So it was kind of like in the back of my mind already processing a lot of these things at that time.
One time I was driving a van full of college students from Houston to Jackson, Mississippi.
Was that when you were at was that Ole Miss?
Yeah, no, this is when Chanel and I both taught at the University of Houston, and we taught a class that was we were taking our students to the Mississippi Delta, and we had to drive them out there in minivans. So I had a van, Chanel had a van, there was another teacher who had a van. So we're driving for hours and hours and hours together up the road, and I'm with college students. So we're going back and forth. Like I plug in my phone and play some music, they plug in their phone, play some music. And, after like 7 hours, we're kind of sick of it. we started listening to comedy, and we start getting the stand up going. And I mean, it was like the 12th hour we're on the road that day, and I turn on Raised by Cable, Your Special, and Baron, I have never laughed so hard in my entire life. I don't know what it was about that environment, because I've heard that album 100 times. I've seen you do it live a bunch, right? But that car ride, those kids were crying. I mean, everybody was like in pain. It was like we reached a level of delirium together as we're driving down the highway, listening to that album all the way through. And I'll never forget it, man. It was just one of the most joyful experiences I've ever had with stand-up comedy.
That's incredibly kind of you to say.
Everybody needs to listen to that album. And, you know, my favorite bit on it was, the pterodactyl bit, right? Which is about your father.
Yes, it is.
We're going to have to cut that in here and play it, right? But you just cut to it. And
it's also a perfect way, or at least I was aspiring to encapsulate, just like we've been talking about, like, I take it for granted that he wasn't around. It was just my normal. Yeah. So it wasn't until I got older and people wanted to ask me about the significance of not having a father that I realized that I was that I did have some feelings about it, and that my feelings were having no feelings about it, which ended up changing. But like the idea that like I would miss somebody that was never there was funny to me. That was the way that I kind of phrased it in that thing. And again, this has to do with watching all of these, different, again, types of stand up and really responding to the people who could take the pain, take the stuff that's deep and turn it into jokes.
You made a beautiful film that I wonder if you'd be willing to talk about. There came a moment where you decided that you wanted to locate your father and get in touch with him. And can you talk about that process and what ended up happening?
Well, something that you said earlier about like Vegas being lonely, I, at a point, realized how much I had internalized that loneliness and expected it and created circumstances in which I would always be lonely because it was the thing that felt the most normal or comfortable. And seeing how much of a closed off person, I guess, in a lot of ways I was, because I wanted to be able to control what everybody outside of me thought. That's the performance, sort of like that part of performance is that at all times I'm in control. I'm the one talking, or I'm playing this part that somebody else wrote. So I didn't, in a lot of ways want to be seen, I think. And it started to grate on me. And when I was, and it's not like I hadn't been in relationships before, but I hadn't been in adult relationships before. And so as I got more, and it probably comes from like, again, watching comics that were older than me, also reading all of these plays and books and seeing all of these movies in which people are trying to really examine these things. I started applying this into relationships. I guess it's like I realized that like the way that I thought about myself in the world was very old, and taking my father for granted, or not understanding that side of my story, accepting silence as the rule in my family history. And when we talked about the past, no longer was working. And I had kind of reached the end of it for myself. So being in a relationship in which I was trying to actually be vulnerable, in which I was courting the stuff I was uncomfortable with, instead of avoiding it or just stuffing it down. Figuring out the story of my father and what the heck happened to my mother and my father was a big part of that, because this was a giant part of my mother's life that I had never talked to her about. I didn't understand it at all. And I guess there was a part of me that knew or felt that as long as that is frozen, I'm frozen.
Wow.
Like I have to unfreeze this stuff to get past it in order to actually trust this person I'm with. That's the other thing, like the trust issues and all of these things where it's like, I didn't realize how little I let people in. Yeah, go ahead.
So it sounds like there's a need to go down this path of finding him and sort of facing him. But it was the fruition, right? Like you'd already done all this work on yourself and sort of exploring yourself. It's the end of a coming of age story, really, the way you're describing it. And that now you're grown, and yet the sort of final piece, right? Or like the need has presented itself for him, but not in the conventional way, right? You didn't need him to teach you how to throw a ball when you were 8, right? It's as an adult, as you're doing all this stuff internally, right? This hard work of becoming the person you want to be.
Absolutely, because the information I had about my father, or what happened between my mother and my father, or how my grandmother or how my great grandparents reacted to all of these circumstances, were bits and pieces of shards of images. And it was stuff that I had completed in my own head. I had filled in the blanks, but there was a lot of blanks. And so I guess there was a part of me that felt like, I'm saying this after the fact, but it's like I wasn't able to let go of or move on from the child version of myself in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Unless I really faced this stuff.
Yeah.
Because the unknown element of it had stunted my growth in some sort of way emotionally. And I felt like I'm at this place now where I'm not afraid of these things. At least I don't think I am. So it's time to like open this box of worms. And my mother had done a lot of work on herself by this time. I had done a lot of work on myself by this time. So it wasn't like by the time I made that documentary and I was like, it's time to meet my dad. Like my mother and I had this fantastic relationship, like completely, opposite from what my childhood was. She was a sober person. She's been working on herself.
When did she get sober?
I was in college when this happened. It was the same summer that I started doing stand-up, the summer of 2001.
Wow.
I remember it because I was in Boston for that summer. And her and I talked on the phone. We did a lot of like soul searching, had a lot of deep conversations.
I bet.
There's still many conversations to be had, but that was the conversation at that time. There was actually this exercise. You ever heard of Augusto Boal?
No.
Augusto Boal is this Brazilian theater educator and director and activist, and he wrote this book called Theater of the Oppressed.
Oh, no, I know that.
Right. So he got, I don't know if it was exiled from freaking Brazil for empowering people with the truth of their own story.
Right.
We did this Boal exercise in one of my theater classes, and it was like, it was like 2 lines facing each other, like 6 kids, whatever. We're all facing each other. And one line was the passive line and one line was the active line. So I was in the active line, which means when she gave us direction, we were supposed to embody it. So she said, all right, now look at the person across from you and imagine them as your oppressor, a time that you were oppressed, and imagine this person as that oppressor. And slowly, I want you to embody your physicality of being oppressed by that person. And so I kind of like turned into this cowering, like don't hit me, don't yell at me kind of boy. And then she said, and now I want you to turn into the body of your oppressor. And so I like stood up and like came into this body of like my mom. And it was like really, and my mom being this oppressor, if you will, but I was the one who was embodying it. And for the first time ever, I saw my mom as a human being. Like it's as simple as that.
Wow.
She wasn't this monster in my story. She was someone who was afraid and didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And that piece of information like sent me on a journey. And luckily at the same time, my mother was working on herself, so when I talked to her, she was ready, to talk to me about some of these things that had happened and to figure it out. There's no other way to say. I want to say reconcile, but we did. We had a really good.
She made some amends.
Yes,
Yeah.
she did.
Yeah,
and we talked about stuff that was really hard to talk about because.
Fuck yeah, man.
And then when I made this doc about my father, it was like I got to understand that story from his side. Like, wow, my mother and my father both were playing out a cycle, and that I was very much trying to break it.
It's a beautiful film. Tell people the name of it and where they can find it.
Yeah, it's called Fatherless. I actually have no idea where it is. It was made for a channel called Fusion that doesn't exist anymore. And for a long time, it was on Amazon Prime, but I don't think it is anymore. So it's out there.
We're going to get it. We're going to get it out there again.
We're going to find it.
We're going to reissue
Fatherless. Yeah, and the whole premise of it was I had this meeting with this dude. His name was Alex Fumero, and we were talking about, they were saying that they wanted to do they wanted to do short documentaries. He basically said 30 for 30s, but like comedy, where it's like comedians doing short documentaries about some subject that they care about or that they're interested in. But
that's a good idea.
Yeah, it was a great idea. And Alex Fumero was like, yeah, so if you ever have an idea for that, let us know. And I said, yeah, I got an idea. Where's my dad? What happened to him? What's his story? And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know. And I explained the culture of silence that I grew up in. And just I learned not to talk about these things because I didn't want to hurt my mom. I didn't want to hurt my grandmother. I didn't want to bring up anything that was hurtful for them. And especially once me and my mother's, our relationship, we repaired our relationship, then I cared even more about, like digging up these skeletons, because these were very informative, hurtful, horrible experiences that led her down a path that she had come back from, and I was afraid to like break her, as simple as that sounds. I was afraid to break her,
or fuck with her recovery, right?
Fuck with her recovery, fuck with her her mental health. Yeah. Her mental fortitude and the peace that she was kind of living with at the time. I didn't want to now I got to come dig up all these skeletons, but it was really healing for both of us. Because in our minds, the things that happen, we remember only the things that were really bad, that were really hard. And so there was something about retracing this story. And yes, it's true that like people who should have been there for her, i.e. my great-grandparents and my grandmother, abandoned her. But at the same time, she had this support group of friends around her. And in college when this happened, and when we were there in Portales again, she had fond memories. It wasn't like, oh, the worst thing that ever happened to me here. It wasn't like, and that's where the hurricane hit me. It was like, oh yeah, in that building, and you were the school of business, baby, and everybody knew you, and and just all of these things that was like, she said, I survived, like I made it. And it was like, there was something about taking my mother there and seeing her release something that I don't think that either of us thought would happen. That was profound for both of us. And then when I met my father, he fortunately had also done a lot of work on himself, and he was ready for what was to come. And I was nervous as hell. It was crazy because I made this thing, but I also didn't understand what the heck I was in store for. I pitched it as a documentary to people who were going to be like, where is it? We need it by this date, to force myself to confront things that I would have just let slide. I would have just, I was complacent.
Yeah. I remember watching it for the first time, and I was surprised that, to me, the most kind of affecting and beautiful parts of that film are the interactions between you and your mom. I mean, as exciting as it is to see, the kind of the first meeting with you and your father, the back and forth between you and your mom throughout the whole film is what I really remember. It being really beautiful. and she's so, you're so endeared to her when you watch that film. I remember texting you, like, I would watch a show of just you and your mom talking. Like, I love the conversations that you guys have in that movie. Yeah, but I mean, just walk us through the meeting, right?
I also have to give a shout out to Dawn Porter, who directed the documentary. Dawn Porter is a brilliant documentary filmmaker. She directed a documentary called, actually, Good Trouble, the one about John Lewis. She directed that.
Yeah.
She did, by the time we worked together, she had done two documentaries. One was called Trapped, which was about the war against reproductive rights at like Southern Planned Parenthoods and how they're all closing down. Wow, still relevant. But she wanted to do something that was funny, and that was but she also knew so well how to handle these emotional moments and how to like make it so it would be to protect me in a lot of ways. So yeah, I mean, like, we're at this park in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was the day I was going to meet him, and I was waiting for this guy, and I guess that I didn't realize how big this was for me at the time, because I was just trying really, really, really hard to be present. But when I looked at the footage later, and I'm looking at myself, I looked like a deer in headlights to myself, and I was like, "Wow!" I'm like imploding. Like, I could see myself being like, "Okay, it's time for my father to come. I'm still here. Look, there's a goose over there, and there's a duck over there. I wonder if they ever play Duck, Duck, Goose." Am I right? High five to no one, but just I was nervous.
Of course.
And I also didn't know what it was going to be like. I didn't know what he was going to be like. I didn't even know what he looked like.
Had you talked to him on the phone at all? Did you talk to him on the phone to set it up?
I never talked to him on the phone, no.
Yeah.
Dawn and Naima, and Naima was one of our producers. Shout out to Naima Jordan. I think they were the ones that were in contact with him.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the ones who had kind of engineered this moment, for us to meet in this park and to talk. And it was surreal. It was so real that it was surreal. And the story continues. The day after that, he took me to one of his favorite restaurants. It's like this Mexican restaurant in Albuquerque. No cameras. It was just me and him, which was great. And I remember it very, very, vividly, because I was sitting across this table looking at this man. We're having tortilla chips and all this stuff. And then at the end, we're leaving, and I go to the restroom to wash my hands, whatever. And I look in the mirror and I see his face in my face.
Wow.
And it was the first time I had ever, I can see my resemblance to my mom, right? But after looking at my father's face and studying it for 2 hours that we were at this dinner, and then I go in the bathroom and then I look up and I'm like, whoa, there he is. I just never had that experience to me. It made me kind of I literally jumped when I saw my own face, whoa. I do look like him.
It's a trip, things. Right? It's a trip.
It was crazy.
Because, to most of humanity, it's the most normal thing in the world, right? It's so normal that you can't even perceive it. You can't even recognize it. But I had the same thing. I mean, I met my birth father at 30 years old. And it was, we hadn't spoken yet. I had no clue who this guy was going to be. I didn't know what he looked like. Nothing. And we met in New York. And I get off the subway and I come up the steps and he's right there. And I'm like, well, that's fucking him. He didn't need to do it. I'm like, hello, myself in 30 years. He just looks exactly like me,
Wow.
And it was a trip, man. Cause I didn't know my birth mother either. So I had never seen another human being who had my DNA. And that was one of the weirdest parts, so surreal that it's real. Yeah. And to sit this close to somebody on a park bench and have a conversation where you're like, it's crazy. So were you able to, to maintain any kind of relationship after that, or?
Absolutely. Like we have a pretty regular conversation, like every couple of weeks.
That's great.
I've gotten to visit him, and I think that there was something that, because at the time, I made the documentary, I was a couple of years into my relationship with my now wife. And I think that there was something about unearthing this story that I want to say cured, but like dissipated a lot of fears that I had about being in a family, as simple as that. My first son was born a year after I met my father, like to the month, not to the day. But it was like, wow, I felt like I was no longer afraid to be a father.
And does he know your kids?
He does. Yeah. We had the pleasure of going out to New Mexico. We went White Sands National Park around the holiday time and met up with my father and my sister. It's my sister by my father, who was also in my life as well. And we got to hang out, they love the kids. The kids love them back. I'm the first child of his to have a child. So I am the reason he's a grandfather.
Yeah.
And, we've definitely been maintaining this relationship. Every now and then I get nervous, when I'm like, oh, I'm going to call him. We're going to end up talking for hours. And then I remember, oh, wait, he's an old straight black man. Like he's got 15 minutes of conversation in him at max, like at the maximum. He can talk to me on the phone and he's in touch with his feelings, but still at maximum, he's got 15 minutes of conversation. So it's always like, I'm like, oh, okay, that was simple. That was actually not bad at all.
Yeah. I'm excited for your next special, man. The parenting comedy gold, I know, is going to give us a gem of an hour one of these days.
Well, I am working on something that's in that vein, and it'll be a little bit more in the one-man show, I think.
Oh, okay.
Category.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I like
solo
that.
show.
Yeah, I like that.
The John Leguizamo show.
Mm-hmm. A Tony Award coming your way is what you're saying.
Oh!
All right.
Don't jinx it.
Baron, thank you so much, man. I could talk to you forever.
From father to father. Oh, boy.
Hey, you know what? By the powers invested in me by this podcast, you're doing a great job. You're a great dad. Appreciate you, man.
Back at you, man.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
You guys want to hear some dad jokes? Yeah? All right. I met my dad. It's hilarious to me. I grew up without my father, and it's fine, guys. I'm fine. I've made my peace with it, right? And it's a simple story. It's a classic romance. My parents were young. My mom was 19. My dad was 21. She was like, I'm pregnant. He was like, not it. And then a couple years ago, I'm standing in a playground in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right? And as this man I never met walked towards me, I opened up my arms and I said, hey, remember when we never came here? Because if you start there, nowhere else to go but up, right? We got along right away. We had so much in common. It was kind of amazing. For instance, I'm a comedian and I'm an actor, and my father acted like I didn't exist for 37 years, and that's a Daniel Day-Lewis level of commitment, y'all. Talk about dedication to a role. That's an acting tip. Make a strong choice. Something like, I don't have a child. And then he nailed that part for 37 years. That's why I wasn't even mad when I met him. I was just impressed. I clapped. I was like, bravo. That was the role of my lifetime. I would now like to award you me. And he's in my phone now. I'm getting comfortable with him being in my life because I changed his number in my phone recently to be saved under his actual name. I had it saved under the black Santa Claus emoji for a really long time because there were some other kids he had to get presents to. What I'm saying is I now have 4 brand new adult siblings, okay? My little sister is 6 months younger than me. Do the math on that. X equals 2 women pregnant at the same time. 5 kids, 4 women. And when a man does that, he's looking for something. Clearly not condoms, but something. And that's okay if these jokes make you uncomfortable, by the way. It's fine if they make you uncomfortable because they are mine, and I refuse to abandon them. Thank you very much, everybody.
can't tell you exactly what it's like to not trust your parents if you've never felt that. But trust me when I say it's destabilizing. It degrades the affection you have for each other. It can lead to a lot of vicious fighting. It makes you constantly suspicious and paranoid, not just of them, but of other people. And it models this aversion to feeling sadness or pain at any cost. This devil's wager, where preserving the smooth surface matters more than dealing with shit honestly. Not being afraid of provoking strong feelings in other people. Or worse, of elevating your own right to a sort of artificial or contingent happiness or sense of security over others' right to be told the fucking truth. To be given the chance to deal with things as they really are, even when that's painful. Another thing I can tell you is that if kids don't trust their parents, they will look elsewhere for someone or something they can trust. Maybe they find that in Richard Pryor. Maybe they find that somewhere else. What Baron's story, and you hear it in the stand-up too, what his story makes clear to me is that one of the prime roles our parents play, whether negatively or positively, is to help us understand who we are, to help things click into place. That may sound obvious, but in real life, in real families, it's pretty complicated. And when a parent isn't around, we create ourselves under the terms of their absence. When they're not fully truthful with us, we make ourselves into people who can navigate the world armed with that uncertainty, those suspicions. And we can still overcome all that, still grow into beautiful adults. But if and when we become parents, we have to reckon with the ways we've been imperfectly parented, untended to, misnurtured. Because now the responsibility is on us. How are these new little people we've made going to understand themselves, who they are, where they come from, why their home is the way it is? Helping them grow confident in their identity, leaving things in plain sight. Recording this episode has made me realize that there is one thing that I haven't been fully honest and transparent with my kids about. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober since 2010, long before either of my kids were born. So for their whole lives, a couple nights a week, I kiss them goodnight and say, Daddy's going to a meeting. I'll come in and check on you when I'm back. Mommy's here. And I go. And ever since Julian, my oldest, could talk, he's wanted to know what these meetings are, who goes to them, what happens in them, and most importantly, why can't he come? Now even little Nico's starting to ask these questions. Why you have meeting, Papa? Little by little over the years, I've sketched in pretty vaguely for Julian that these meetings are about grown-up problems, that we, adults, need help too sometimes. And if we're upfront about that, there are ways we can help each other. For a while, that seemed to be enough. But he's almost 7 now, and he's asking more and more pointed and articulate questions. What kind of problems are we talking about, Dad? What's the nature of these problems to which you so mysteriously refer? So I talked to my wife, and we all agree he's old enough to understand a little more about this. Because what I don't want is for him to discover what these meetings are all about one day on his own and feel like he's been lied to. I don't even want him to have a memory of learning about this at all. I want him to grow up with a sense that he's pretty much always understood this. It's just another normal feature of our family life. Because understanding something like alcoholism and recovery is going to be a long process. It's not one conversation. It's a bunch of conversations over time. You can't push it, but you can't hide from it either. An example, I was adopted at birth, as was my older brother, most of our cousins, even my godparents' children. It was like this whole network of adopted kids we were part of, where being adopted was more normal than not. And I have no memory whatsoever of ever learning that I was adopted or what adopted even meant. I sort of just always knew. There was no earth-shattering revelation. There was no, come in, sit down, we have something to tell you. Somehow my parents just made sure I always understood. They microdosed me with the knowledge that I came from another's womb, from the seed of a mystery man whose name, likeness, and background were lost to the mists of time. We'll talk more about that mystery man later. The point is, the strategy of theirs, in retrospect, seems like a good thing. That's what I want for my kids when they're older, the sense that they pretty much always knew their dad was in recovery. So I've decided I'm going to help Julian begin to understand what my meetings are about. He's going to have a lot of questions, an aggressive line of questioning. He's going to want to know, like, the chemical compound of alcohol and what it does to the cellular system of various organs. He's going to want to know what anonymous means. He's going to want to know, like, if this is a secret society you're in, right, what kind of costumes are we talking about? Are there wizards? He might ask something like, what happens if you drink again? He might ask, is he going to be an alcoholic too one day? I'm going to figure out the best way to open up this conversation with him and where the guardrails are. And I'll let you know how it goes. That's on the next episode of PODRE. All right, that's our show. Join us next time when I'll be talking to writer and co-founder of N+1, Keith Gesson. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends to download and subscribe. Help us grow this into I'm not going to say movement. I'm going to say scene. A whole scene of dads and the dad adjacent, or even just dad curious people who want to understand themselves and their kids and their parents a little better. Thanks for listening. See you next time. PODRE is created and produced by me, Chris Brunt. Additional production on this episode by John Greenhall. Original artwork for the show is by David Wojo. Special thanks to Brad Franco and Julian and Nico Benz-Brunt.
But this episode is now over.